What it do, my dudes? Okay, we got the GOAT of arcade motocross games versus MX vs. ATV Legends, okay? So, two different reasons why I'm making this video. Number one is to sort of give a comparison to Reflex and Legends and sort of what the developers could try to do with Legends to get it a little bit more like Reflex was. I know that can be a little bit hard to maybe pinpoint what it is that the bike needs to change, you know, physics-wise, or what it is that the gameplay needs to change to get it more like back in the old school Reflex days that we all loved, okay? Listen, if anybody tries to tell you that Reflex ain't the GOAT of arcade fucking dirt bike games, if anybody tries to tell you that, bro, you need to run from them. You need to, I don't even know if you can really trust their opinion on anything at that point. I mean, listen, okay? I'm a firm believer in everybody can have their own opinion and everything like that. But this is one of those moments, Reflex is one of those things where it's not even close. It's not like there's another one of these dirt bike games that's almost as good as Reflex, or like, you know, might be kind of, bro, it's not even close. There's just nothing else like it. Now, obviously, we're excluding games like MX Simulator, MX Bikes. Those are kind of completely different kind of games. We're talking strictly arcade dirt bike games like the Milestone games, MXGP official Supercross games, Mud the official video game, right? All the MX vs. ATV, all these different dirt bike games, right? Reflex, and this is the biggest thing right here that I think is different from Legends' physics feel and Reflex's physics feel, is Reflex really was able to capture the difference between the rider and the bike, okay? And I want you to really sit down and think about this for a second, okay? Like with Reflex, it's basically like the rider is completely its own independent thing from the bike, right? So it's like what you're doing with the controller on Reflex affects the rider, but then it's like it has a whole nother layer or stage or transition between what you're doing on the controller to that, you know, split second of like realism delay that it takes to then affect the bike and what the bike is doing. Whereas like on MX vs. ATV Legends, it almost feels like the bike and the rider are the same thing, like they're joined. So when you're doing something with the controller on Legends, it's like you're moving the bike and the rider at the same time, versus like on Reflex, it's like the rider's a separate thing. I don't even know how to explain it, dude. It's like Reflex gets to such a point where you can't explain how good it is anymore. It's like too good to be true or some shit, you know? Like Reflex really is like that, bro. It's almost like with Legends, everything is a little too direct still. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't have that realistic inertia delay, you know, forward and backwards sort of suspension movement over roughness. It's like, and I know this because you can go down the downhill of Millville, super rough downhill on Legends. You can be wide ass open on that bike, bro. We're talking 420 miles an hour down that hill. And never let off the gas. The bike never feels like it's going to bounce away from you. Reflex is totally different. And especially in the ruts, I don't think there is any other arcade dirt bike game out there that even remotely comes close to the feeling that you get. The inner soul fucking happiness that you get whenever you rail a rut, whenever you rail a pre-made rut on Reflex, wide ass open on that 450, you've already got maximum momentum, and you just rail the shit out of that rut. It just totally pulls the bike. You're hanging on for dear life. That is so much fun on Reflex, and that is a big difference between Reflex and Legends. Legends does not feel like that in the ruts. No matter how big the rut is, and listen, whenever I'm making this comparison video here, I'm talking about Legends after the first 3 updates, okay? This is after the first fix to the sliding, and then the second fix to the sliding. You know, after all of that, the fix to the gearbox, the whole 9 yards, right? Legends is already a different game at this point, okay? So we're talking about Legends as it is right now versus Reflex, all right? But still, and I challenge some of you guys, go back and ride on some of these custom national tracks on Reflex. Go back and you will see what I'm saying. It's a totally different kind of experience. It's a totally different kind of way to play a motocross game. The way you hit these ruts, the way the roughness is going into the ruts, the naturalistic feel to the jump faces, the pre-made's awesome, the way the physics of the game just happen to be when you go into a rut or you scrub off of a jump face or you pop up off of a rut on a jump face. All of those things just sends the bike into such a realistic sort of reaction and animation and motion whenever you do something on the bike. It like never loses its flow. Even if you're crashing on Reflex, it never loses its flow. There is this certain unmistakable feeling to Reflex. I even think it's a lot better on the Xbox 360 version. I just feel like the physics are better on the 360 version of Reflex than the PC version, but even still, there's just something about it that just makes it look and feel so realistic. And I'm not talking realistic like, you know, some of the milestone games try to be realistic in the sense of you can't even whip the bike more than like an amateur could in real life, you know. It's got like all these limitations to it. That's not what I mean by realistic. I'm not saying like what you could do, you know, Mr. C-class rider at your local track. That's not what realistic for an arcade dirt bike game means. You need to be able to toss that bike over just about like James Stewart could in real life. Obviously, you know, there needs to be a lot of checks and balances where you can pop off the bike and it creates that difficulty level, which Reflex has, right? Reflex even had leg swag, dude. Like, before leg swag was even a thing. You can scrub so hard your dude, like, kind of kicks his leg out a little bit, does a little leg swag. It's fucking sick. Like, but anyways, yes, so I feel like Legends is somewhat comparable to, like, Alive, and I certainly think after all of the updates they do with Legends, it will definitely be to Alive's level. It may not quite be there yet, but it's close. It's really close. So now we're kind of in that stage of what does MX vs. ATV do with the next game that they're making after they do these changes to Legends over these next couple years. Looking forward to that next MX vs. ATV game, unless they just decide to work on it for 5+ years, you know, but that should be your goal, because I'm telling you right now, the gameplay experience, going back to Reflex, the stock tracks, the custom Lucas Oil Pro Motocross tracks, with pre-made, without pre-made, with terrain deformation, I mean, either or, it's just a better, more fun, more skill-gapped, more replayable, more engaging gameplay than what you have on these Lucas Oil Pro Motocross tracks on Legends, period. And even with the stock tracks on Legends, the stock motocross tracks, a lot of them are pretty fun. They're big jump, they're big daddy T sipping ripping, but they're still a lot different than like it is going in there and riding on a national track on Reflex. You know what I'm saying? I feel like the stock tracks of Legends are a lot more, in what combined with the gameplay of Legends, feels a lot more like you're playing like a Unleashed 2.0 or a Untamed 2.0, you know, like some sort of, if you could have had like a modern version of Unleashed or Untamed in a way, that's kind of what Legends feels like to me on the stock motocross tracks, you know, with the air physics and the big daddy jumping like you did back in Untamed and shit, right? It does have the clutch boosting like you had back in Alive. I feel like Reflex is a prime example of you don't need a crazy clutch boost system in an arcade dirt bike game. You don't have to have that. That's definitely not a requirement for super fun gameplay. Reflex proves so many things. It's the end all be all. It's the thing you want to try to make your arcade dirt bike game like the most. It is, period. It's just on another level in every way. I can't think of a single thing other than graphics that is actually better about another arcade dirt bike game than Reflex. Period. I can't think of a single thing, bro. Boy, this more truth than you had, top right here, boy. God dang. It's everything, bro. It's the feeling of diving in one of those pre-made ruts on Reflex, never letting off the gas. But a lot of times, see, Reflex, like the scaling of the custom tracks and even the scaling of the stock tracks, for the majority part of them, it's like it creates this perfect harmony and balance when you combine the speed of the bike and the physics of the bike. Like with Reflex, it's like you're always playing this game of trying to hold it wide open, but it's like really hard to do that around the entire track, especially when you get on the more pre-made rutty tracks. It's almost faster if you baby the throttle a little bit. Obviously, you're still wide open on 69% of the track, or even more, but Spency boy got to throw out the 69, you know what I'm saying, bro? Sometimes it works with what I'm trying to say. Sometimes got to, but you're pretty much wide open 80% of the time, on the national tracks on Reflex at least. You're always playing that game of, would it be faster to let off and take this inside rut? Would it be better to kind of, and it all happens on the fly a lot of times, especially on the national tracks, especially with the terrain deformation. The bike and the physics, you're constantly watching what it's doing and how it's bouncing and how the momentum of the back end of the bike is working underneath you. And it's constantly, the bike is doing its own thing in a way underneath you on Reflex. So then a lot of times you come into a corner and you thought you was going to hit a certain rut, but you're like going too fast, or you kick up and bounce a weird way and you have to react on the fly. And then it's just like really engaging. You just can't look away. It's this like interconnection bond whenever you get that 450 set up good enough on Reflex, speed-wise, right? And even suspension-wise, where you can really get to getting that bike hauling ass, to that warping level of speed on Reflex that I like to call it, where it's you're actually on another level, where it's like almost hard to even look at, because you can rail the rut so hard on Reflex that it's almost like time ended and then came back when you come out of the rut. That's how fucking hard you can rail ruts on Reflex. Legends, even though it's got some good elements to it, it's still not like that. It just doesn't give you that kind of an experience. Legends does have quite a bit of skill gap to it, and it's got a pretty cool pop-off system, but as far as the way the bike reacts over roughness and And even the scrub and the whip system, I think the scrubbing is pretty good on Legends, but the whip system could use some work still, specifically making it a little more natural, like it's coming back around, you know, like naturally like it would. There's like certain things with Legends, I feel like if they could touch it up a little bit, and if they make the tracks a little bit bigger scaling, like as far as the Lucas Oil Pro Motocross DLC, make the track a little bigger, more rough, pre-made roughness, pre-made ruts. They did a little more of that when they updated a couple of the national tracks just in this past update. But you know, the tracks need a lot more, and then they can start doing more to the physics and get it a little bit more like Reflex. But at the end of the day, it's like, I just think Legends just, there's some times where you'll come into a corner and the bike will act like it's got that weird twitchy, still like a little glitch bug thing they got going on. Sometimes if the bike, it'll just like turn completely, but like in a super weird way, like the ass end will just step out, but it feels like a glitch, and then it like the bike, it just goes to a complete stop. It's kind of bizarre. Reflex, that's the whole thing to the physics of Reflex. It never loses that you know, immersion in that. Kind of looks like if James Stewart was on his best day on a real life dirt bike. You know what I'm saying? Whether or not you're flipping over the bars, crashing, or you're hitting roughness really hard, or you're scrubbing the bike, scrubbing the bike over the jump phase, it always keeps this level of believability to it on Reflex. And Legends is still just not quite to that level, you know? The fact that Reflex is even still comparable to games that are made more than a decade after it says a lot. That says a lot. That is like such another level. And the fact that the track editor was so easily accessible for Reflex and got the whole community built around it, it was really the first like community driven. I mean, MX Sim was like right there along with it, but I feel like Reflex was certainly one of the first like community driven booms that we saw on YouTube for motocross gaming. You know, the track reviews on Reflex were a big deal back in the day. I say back in the day now. Holy shit. I guess that was back in the day now. Damn, dude. Spitzy boy been around the block a couple times. Damn, dude. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying here is they still got some work to do with Legends. But I think the goal should be at this point, now you've got the game to a point, just try to get it a little more like Reflex. Just try, you know, and see what happens. Try to make the tracks a little more like either the stock tracks of Reflex or the custom tracks on Reflex, the good ones, you know. Try to emulate some of that pre-made and scaling feeling, and try to emulate, like, you know, some of the mechanics of Reflex with, you know, calming down the clutch boosting. I just don't, I mean, I don't know. I feel like Reflex feels better than Legends, and it doesn't really have clutch boosting, obviously, other than when you take off, but the clutch doesn't feel like you need to be pulling it in and dumping it everywhere on Reflex, and it still feels amazing. It's still got a shitload of skill gap. It's still got a ton of stuff that can happen on the fly on a track that makes the game feel so real, but like still super fun and arcadey. Like Reflex is the perfect mix between realistic and arcadey for an arcade dirt bike game. You know what I'm saying? It's that perfect combo. There's no other arcade dirt bike game that has that same kind of combo. I feel like Legends has some realistic elements to it like Reflex has, but not all the way. You know, it's still missing that extra 25% of realism and inertia and, you know, track designs and certain things that Reflex had to it to get it back to somewhat of that kind of level. I'm not even saying they need a, you know, or they even could make a exact replica of Reflex, but like in a newer game, I don't think they can ever do that. But all I'm saying is the closer you can get it, the better. You know, at the end of the day, that's what it is, man. That's just what it is, man.